Chapter 55. Beetroot? Sulen paused for a moment before asking, "Where did you find it? Do you have any more?" "It's on the slope over there. There's still a lot." Bard pointed at the slope not far away. The two arrived at the slope, where a large patch of lush plants grew. They looked a bit like the radishes in his previous life. "Monseigneur, this is the beetroot. My mother found it when we were in the giant bear tribe." Bard dug out a beetroot and handed it to Sulen. Sulen took the beetroot and shook off the soil on it. The beetroot looked like a short and fat radish with a sharp root and red skin. After washing it with water, Sulen cut off a small piece and tasted it. A sweet taste instantly filled his mouth. "It's so sweet," Sulen said in surprise. The beetroot was very sweet, much sweeter than the sugarcane he ate in his previous life. He wasn't sure when he drank the beetroot soup, but after tasting it for himself, he was finally sure that the beetroot was the beet from his previous life. This kind of beet was widely planted in the north. Apart from being eaten as a vegetable, its biggest use was to extract sugar. Sugar was a luxury accessory in ancient times and was much more expensive than salt. At that time, there weren't many ways to obtain sugar. Apart from some fruits, the only other way was to obtain sugar from honey. There were no railways, no cars, no highways, and no high-speed trains. Fruits weren't easy to preserve, so it wasn't easy to eat them. When he was in Kalan City in the south, apart from some local fruits, there were only preserved fruits from the desert kingdom, such as dates and raisins. Of course, there were also white sugar and honey, but the amount of white sugar was very small and very expensive. The white sugar was shipped from the south, and the amount produced every year was pitifully small. The sugar extraction process in this era was still very primitive. The south used sugarcane to extract sugar, and the color of the extracted sugar was reddish-brown. The amount of white sugar was even less. Sulen found sugar beets here. As long as he planted them on a large scale, his territory would produce a large amount of white sugar every year. Although white sugar was not a necessity or even a luxury compared with salt, for the nobles, it was a regular item. In fact, there wasn't much difference between white sugar and brown sugar. The sugar content was also similar, but brown sugar didn't taste as good as white sugar. It had a bitter taste. Therefore, the price of brown sugar and white sugar were very different, and the nobles could only use white sugar to entertain their guests. If news of them using brown sugar to entertain their guests spread, they would become a joke in the noble circle. It was said that the white sugar produced by the Southern City-State Alliance was made with the help of wizards. Most of the white sugar produced in other places were the same. Sulen knew a way to use brown sugar. Brown sugar was white 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 sugar was brown sugar. In this era, humans didn't have a good way to get rid of the impurities, but Sulen knew a simple and effective way to filter out the impurities in brown sugar. Sulen put down the beetroot in his hand and ordered, "Go get everyone here and collect the beetroot." Soon, all the beetroot was collected. The beetroot had been growing here for a long time, and many of them had already borne seeds. Sulen also collected all the beetroot seeds. He was going to plant a large amount of beetroot in his territory. After 3 hours, all the beetroot on the hill was finally collected. The whole hill was full of potholes, and they collected a total of 400 to 500 pounds of beetroot and a bag of beetroot seeds. After collecting all the beetroot, Sulen didn't continue to explore. Instead, he brought everyone back to the town. As soon as they returned to the town, Sulen called a few craftsmen over and prepared to make all kinds of sugar extracting tools. The sugar extracting process wasn't difficult. Under Sulen's guidance, the craftsmen didn't spend much effort to make a sugar extracting machine. In fact, the sugar extracting machine was an improved version of an oil press. After washing and cutting the beetroot into small pieces, they were put into the machine to extract the juice. As the machine ran, a red juice flowed out. This juice contained a lot of sugar. The normal way to make it was to filter out the impurities and then heat the sugar water to obtain the sugar. 2 barbarian warriors turned the machine, and the sugar water continued to seep out. Soon, a bucket was filled to the brim. Sulen dipped his hand in the sugar water and put it in his mouth. The sweetness was very strong. This way, only brown sugar was produced. If Sulen wanted to make white sugar, he had to use another filtering method. He was going to use activated carbon filtration. When he was in school in his previous life, he knew that activated carbon was a widely used filtration material. This material had a very good filtration effect. Although Sulen knew that activated carbon had a good filtration effect, he didn't know how it was made. Even if he had learned about it in school, he had forgotten most of it after so many years. He only remembered that activated carbon was obtained by carbonizing wood. Although he didn't know how to make activated carbon, he still knew how to make charcoal. Now, the territory used charcoal every day to make steel. Although charcoal didn't have as good a filtration effect as activated carbon, it could still be filtered. At worst, he could just filter it a few more times. He sent someone to the kiln factory to deliver a cart of charcoal. Then, he had the workers crush the charcoal into small particles and wash the particles with water. On one hand, he directed the barbarians to extract the sugar water, and on the other hand, he directed the others to make the charcoal particles. After washing the charcoal and drying it, Sulen obtained a pile of small black particles. Next, he poured the black charcoal particles directly into the red sugar water and stirred. It was time to witness a miracle. The original reddish-brown sugar water's color constantly faded during the stirring process. Soon, the color became clear. Several barbarians next to him looked at Sulen's operation in a daze. They couldn't figure out why the brown sugar water became transparent after adding those black things. Seeing the sugar water become transparent, Sulen couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that his method was successful. Hurry up and work, don't eat. While Sulen was laughing foolishly, two barbarians secretly reached into the water bucket, scooped up a spoonful of sugar water, and quickly drank it. Sulen picked up the spoon and hit their heads twice. The two barbarians laughed foolishly and continued to work. P.S. Thank you for the 500 Chidian coins reward. Thank you for the 100 Chidian coins reward. Thank you for the 100 Chidian coins reward. Thank you for the 100 Chidian coins reward. Chapter 56. After the sugar water became clear, Sulen did not continue to stir it. He let the sugar water settle and then filtered out the charcoal. A bucket of sugar water was about 20 liters. In order to turn the sugar water into sugar, it needed to be heated and the water in the sugar water evaporated. When the water was reduced to a certain level, there would be crystals. Sulen found an iron pot and poured the sugar water into it. He then lit a fire and slowly boiled it. As the temperature rose, the water in the sugar water began to evaporate. The process of boiling the sugar was very slow. Sulen watched for a while and felt bored. Fortunately, there was no problem with his method of boiling the sugar. After about an hour, some white granules began to appear at the bottom of the iron pot. After seeing the white granules, Sulen immediately became energetic. After the white sugar appeared, the speed of the sugar production began to accelerate. The fire continued to roast, and the sugar water in the iron pot boiled. More and more white crystals appeared in the iron pot. The barbarian warrior next to him smacked his lips. "Boss, this sugar water is boiling. How did it freeze?" "Idiot, don't talk if you don't know." Sulen glared at him. As time went by, the sugar water in the iron pot became less and less, and the condensed sugar became more and more. Finally, after boiling for a while, there was no more white sugar in the pot, and Sulen filtered the white sugar out. The remaining sugar water was actually waste honey. Although it contained a lot of sugar, it could not be extracted due to technical reasons. Waste honey had a high sugar content, but due to technical reasons, it could not be extracted. In the end, some people found that the waste honey could be used to make wine. Then, the new type of rum was born. Using cotton gauze to filter out the waste honey, a pile of white granules appeared in the iron pot. They were white granules that looked like sand and snow. They were white granules. The barbarians next to him did not know what it was. They all looked at the white sugar in amazement. Try it. Sulen crossed his arms and raised his chin casually. But his act was in vain. These barbarians in the wilderness had never heard of white sugar before. It looks like ice crystals. One of the barbarians reached out his finger, dipped it into his mouth, and said in surprise, "It's sweet." "Is this candy?" Sulen knocked the barbarian's head with his spoon. "Nonsense, what else can it be if it's not sugar?" "Boss, does that mean we'll have candies to eat in the future?" the barbarians asked excitedly. "Eat, eat, eat, you only know how to eat. These are goods for trading." Sulen grabbed a handful of white sugar and looked at it. Compared to the white sugar he ate in his previous life, the white sugar in front of him was slightly yellowish. This should be because the filtering effect of the charcoal was not as strong. Even so, the quality of the white sugar was still very good. Sulen collected the white sugar and then weighed it. There was a total of more than 3 kilograms of white sugar. The boiling sugar water was 20 liters, which was about 40 kilograms. A total of 3 kilograms of white sugar was produced. Sulen was very satisfied with the sugar yield. Using this relatively primitive method to make white sugar, 3 caddies of white sugar was already a lot. As far as Sulen knew, the sugar yield in this era was only 5% to 7%, and the sugar produced was brown sugar. Sulen used 1/5 of the beetroot he brought back this time. After confirming the method to make white sugar, he squeezed all the remaining beetroot juice and made white sugar. In the end, he got 15 caddies of white sugar. After drying the 15 caddies of white sugar, he sealed it in a clay jar and stored it. Ding! Congratulations to the host. You have successfully made white sugar and obtained the sugar production process. Congratulations to the host. You have successfully obtained 3 different techniques and successfully opened the technology column. Updating data. Update complete. Just as he sealed the white sugar, the system notification sounded in his ear. Opening the system interface, Sulen soon saw a science and technology column in the town interface. He clicked on the science and technology column and saw that there were already 3 skills in the science and technology column: smelting iron, farming, and sugar making. Under the 3 skills, all the steps and key points of the skills were clearly marked. According to these production steps, it was possible to build a workshop. Seeing this situation, Sulen directly built the workshop according to the steps given. The sugar workshop needed about 1,000 square meters of space. Such an important workshop could only be built in the town. Sulen drew an open space near his lord's castle and then directed the slaves to build it. The sugar workshop didn't have too complicated machinery and the difficulty of building it wasn't high. Sulen directed the slaves to build the workshop while he sent a large number of people to the wilderness to collect beetroot. Before the beetroot in the territory was harvested, the raw materials for the sugar workshop could only be found in the wilderness. Fortunately, the wilderness was large enough. Although there weren't many places where beetroot grew, with such a large area collected, the amount of beetroot in the warehouse increased at a speed visible to the naked eye. The construction speed of the sugar refinery was very fast. It only took 2 days for a workshop to be completed. Sugar workshop. This is a simple handmade workshop. It can make white sugar, rock sugar, and other kinds of sugar. Sugar quality +1. Sugar yield +1. Because the process of making sugar wasn't complicated, if it wasn't controlled, it could easily be leaked. Sulen separated the processes, and each person was only responsible for one part. The most important part was the process of removing impurities with charcoal. Sulen selected 2 slaves with 100 loyalty to do the work. This process was also carried out in a separate room. After the impurities were removed, the sugar water would be sent to another workshop for processing. In addition to these, Sulen added a wall outside the sugar workshop. Apart from the workers of the workshop, no one else was allowed to come close. At the same time, Sulen also arranged 4 barbarian warriors outside the workshop. They would be responsible for the safety of the sugar workshop. Although there were no outsiders in his territory at the moment, once he took out the sugar for sale, his territory would soon be known by those who were interested. The profit of sugar wasn't low. No, it was very high. A caddy of sugar could easily be sold for hundreds of kinnar in Kalt. If the sugar workshop produced 500 caddies of sugar every month, Sulan would earn tens of thousands of kinnar every month. It was comparable to a small city's annual tax revenue. Of course, this was only the best-case scenario. In fact, when Sulan started selling sugar in large quantities, the price of sugar would definitely drop. After all, the rarer something was, the more expensive it was. Chapter 57. Selling a large amount of white sugar would lower the price, but there was nothing he could do about it. However, if Sulan sold a limited amount every month, the price of white sugar would not fluctuate too much. After all, according to the consumption rate of the nobles, there were over 100 nobles in Kalt, so they would consume a few hundred kilograms of white sugar. In the past, the nobles only used white sugar when they entertained guests. Most of the time, they used brown sugar and honey instead. If they had white sugar, they would not use brown sugar anymore. In the entire northern lands, there were over a dozen big cities and over 100 small cities. There were also hundreds of towns. Sulan did not know how many nobles lived in those towns. However, the production of his sugar workshop was not enough to satisfy the market in the northern lands. If the white sugar trade developed, Sulan's fief would definitely reap huge profits. When that time came, there would be many people who would want a share of the profits. Fortunately, his fief was located in the wilderness. The nearest city was at least 300 miles away. This made it impossible for the nobles to use many of their methods. Of course, it would be difficult to make them give up unless Sulan's fief was powerful enough. For example, he had a powerful army. Only a powerful force could deter those with ulterior motives. Although Sulan was powerful, he was not invincible. With the completion of the sugar workshop, the sugar production began. Sulan selected 20 of his serfs and had them work in the sugar workshop. Carts of beet roots were transported here after being cleaned. Then, they were cut into small pieces and poured into the juicer. With the operation of the workers, the purplish-red beet juice was squeezed out and flowed into the wooden barrel through a special pipe. Soon, a bucket of beet juice was filled. Then, the beet juice was sent to another room for processing. When the processing was completed, the purplish-red beet juice became transparent. Seeing the workshop work in an orderly manner, it did not take long for the white sugar to be produced. The quality of the white sugar produced this time was very good. The grains of white sugar looked crystal clear. The quality was even better than the previous batch. Sulan understood that this was a special effect of the workshop. After weighing the white sugar, the yield was also higher. After seeing that the sugar refinery was operating normally, Sulan breathed a sigh of relief. In addition to the production of white sugar, the sugar refinery also produced a lot of waste products. Most of them were beet dregs. These were the leftovers after the beets were squeezed out. After processing, these beet dregs could be used to make fodder. Coincidentally, the territory also had a lot of livestock. These beet dregs were just right to be used as fodder. As for the leftover waste honey, Sulan was going to use it to make wine. The price of wine was not cheap. If it was successfully used to make wine, it would be a stable income for Sulan's territory. However, there was no one in the territory who knew how to make wine, so Sulan had no choice but to store the waste honey first. The next time he went to Kalt City, he would ask Xian to buy a few slaves who knew how to make wine. After all, the beets were not artificially grown. After a period of excavation, the wild beets began to decrease significantly. Sulan drew out 300 mu of land for the beets. It was not that he did not want to plant them on a large scale. It was just that the beet seeds were limited. Even if he wanted to expand the planting area, he would need enough seeds. Therefore, he could only wait until the first batch of beets was harvested in the territory. After obtaining more beet seeds, he could plant them on a large scale. In the following time, Sulen did not only patrol the territory, but also look for beets. It didn't take long for most of the beets around the territory to be collected. If he wanted to collect more beets, he would need to go outside the territory. Su Luan needed to lead a team to explore the outside of the territory. With the strategic map provided by the system, it could automatically record the places he had been to. So as long as he walked through the area once, a corresponding map would be generated on his strategic map. Sulen led a team of barbarian warriors to search the wilderness. This place was close to the Sierra de Lotus. Not long ago, they found a small patch of beets on a nearby slope. After digging up the beets, Sulen and the others continued to move forward. After approaching the mountains, Sulen planned to investigate the area a bit more before leaving. After all, this place was very close to the Cryopteris. After passing through a forest, a hidden valley suddenly appeared in front of them. The valley was not big. It was surrounded by lush trees and looked very green. A stream flowed out of the valley. The noon sun was still very hot. The metal armor on the barbarians was a bit hot. Sulen planned to take them to the valley to avoid the sun. Following the stream towards the valley, the group quickly arrived at the center of the valley. With the two peaks blocking the way, the valley was much dimmer. The group came to the stream to freshen up. The barbarian warriors took off their armor and jumped into the stream to wash themselves. Sulen came to the upper reaches of the stream and used both hands to wash the water. The water from the melting snow on the mountain was cold and immediately chased away the heat in his body. After washing up, he filled his water bag with water. Only then did Sulen start to look around the valley. At this moment, his eyes suddenly paused. He saw a stone statue on the greenish-gray rock wall at the bottom of the valley. The surface of the statue had been eroded by the wind and rain for many years. From the outside, this statue was at least a few hundred years old. Sulen was not a historian and could not distinguish the style of this statue. However, since there was a statue here, there must have been people living here. Looking up at the valley, Sulen found that there was only one exit. The exit was narrow, but the space in the valley was very large. As long as the entrance was guarded, the valley would be very safe. The land in the valley was flat and the soil was good. It was very suitable for farming. Sulen did a rough calculation. The entire valley could be cultivated for at least 5,000 mu of land. Together with the stream inside, it would not be a problem to feed a few thousand people. Sulen came near the stone statue to see if there were any other clues. Soon, he found a door covered by vines on the rock wall behind the statue. The door was made of metal and looked very heavy. However, it was rusty. Sulen knocked on it with his hand. There was no hollow sound. It was obvious that the metal door was very thick. Such a heavy door should be controlled by a mechanism. Otherwise, not many people would be able to move it. Sulen called the barbarians over to search. He was very curious about what was behind the metal door. Chapter 58. Boss, does this door really have a switch? Baran knocked on the door with his axe, and a dull sound came from within. The group searched the area for a long time, but didn't find any mechanism that could open the door. You guys step back, Sulen said with a wave of his hand. He was ready to break open the door by force. Looking at the marks on the door, the mechanism inside might have been damaged long ago. Even if they found it, they wouldn't be able to open it. Sulen stretched out his hand and pressed it on the rusty iron door. Then, his muscles tightened, and the two iron doors creaked and creaked as they moved bit by bit. A large amount of dust fell from the top of the door, and the heavy iron door began to move slowly. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of metal breaking came from behind the door, and the heavy stone door slowly but firmly opened. Sulen sighed in relief when the iron door was half open, and rubbed his arms. The door opened, and a rotten and moldy smell came from inside. Sulen didn't go in immediately. Who knew if the air inside was poisonous after so long? He casually summoned a whirlwind and sent it into the door. Soon, the air with a strong rotten and moldy smell came out from inside. After 2 or 3 breaths, the smell inside returned to normal. The 2 barbarians took the newly made torches and walked in first. After entering the door, the lights suddenly dimmed a lot. Under the light of the torches, the group could see the inside of the passage clearly. It was a passage about 4 meters wide and 3 meters high. There was a row of bronze wall lamps on both sides of the passage. The passage was dark, and they didn't know where it led to. Sulen walked along the passage, and soon saw a rotten corpse with only a pile of bones left. Judging from his attire, he should be an adventurer. The clothes on the corpse were tattered, and there were a few broken arrows in front of his chest. This unlucky fellow must have stepped on a mechanism in the passage and been shot to death. After rummaging through the corpse, he discovered that there was nothing else on the corpse except for a rusty weapon. Just as the group was about to move on, the corpse that had turned into a pile of bones slowly stood up. Undead? Sulen was not surprised to see the skeleton revive. When he entered the passage, he felt that the negative energy here was a little high. If the corpse stayed in this place for a long time, there was a high chance that it would awaken as an undead. There was no soul fire in the skeleton's eyes, which meant that it was only the lowest level of resurrected skeletons. This kind of low-level undead was very easy to deal with. As long as one could overcome their fear, even a farmer could crush it. As an undead creature, it was very sensitive to the aura of the living. The moment it stood up, it held the rusty weapon and wanted to attack Sulen. In the end, before it could make a move, a huge axe swept across and shattered its skeleton. The broken bones scattered in all directions, leaving only a skull that landed beside its feet. When the steel boots stepped on it, there was a cracking sound as the skull was smashed into pieces. Be careful, there might be traps inside. After dealing with the skeletons, the group continued to advance. In fact, it was best to have a thief with them for exploration. After all, thieves were very familiar with all kinds of hidden weapons and mechanisms, so it was easy for them to break through them. Sulen's group was either a barbarian or a thief, so they could only use brute force to break through the traps. Fortunately, the ruins had been explored before, so many of the traps could not be triggered a second time. Only some expensive and ingenious traps could be reset after being triggered. As they went deeper into the passage, the eerie feeling became more and more intense. Soon, Sulen saw 3 more corpses that had also decayed into bones. One of the corpses had 3 broken ribs, probably caused by a blunt object. The other 2 corpses had at least 10 arrows stuck in them. Sulen casually checked the corpses and found a few knars and some rotten parchment. The parchment had become so tattered that even the writing on it could not be read clearly. These corpses did not turn into undead. Sulen guessed that their bones were too damaged. After sweeping the corpses to the side, the group continued to advance. At this moment, a creaking sound suddenly came from the empty passage, like the sound of a rusty door opening suddenly. Immediately after, a black shadow suddenly rushed in from the front. The barbarian warrior at the front immediately raised his 2-handed axe. The wide surface of the axe was like a shield, blocking most of his body. Then, the black shadow crashed into the axe with a bang, and the barbarian's body was knocked back. Sulen finally saw clearly that it was a wooden stake as thick as a bowl. The front part of the stake was covered with a layer of copper. Although it was made of wood, it was still very heavy. Seeing this, Sulen understood that the corpses with broken ribs were caused by this trap. But he did not expect that this trap could still be used after hundreds of years. Seeing that the wooden stake was charging again after the collision, a barbarian warrior at the side chopped over with his axe. The huge force directly broke the iron chain hanging on the wooden stake. The wooden stake lost its balance and crashed into the wall beside it. After dismantling the trap, Sulen checked on the barbarian who had been hit. Although he had been hit heavily, he had used his axe to block it before this. Coupled with the armor on his body, this barbarian with thick skin and thick flesh was not injured at all. He was just a little embarrassed from the fall. After encountering this trap, the group was obviously much more careful. After confirming that there were no other traps on the stone door, the two barbarian warriors prepared to push it open. Woo! A gust of chilly wind blew through the stone door, and then a shadow rushed out from the stone door. The shadow was hazy and looked sinister. Sensing something, the two of them slashed forward without hesitation. When the black shadow came into contact with their weapons, it disappeared with a whoosh. Spectre? The barbarian warriors looked at each other and said. According to scientific theory, this is the violent oxidation of century-old dyes when they come into contact with the air. What ghost? Sulen said with a wave of his hand. He had seen this scene often in movies about grave robbers in his previous life. He explained with a serious expression. Even though the barbarian warriors next to him didn't understand what Sulen was saying, they still nodded to show that they understood. However, Sulen seemed to have forgotten something. This world had supernatural powers. Hee hee. A burst of eerie laughter appeared around them. Boss, what does science say about that sound just now? A barbarian warrior at the side asked as he approached. Your path is too narrow, brother. Suluan made a note of this unsensible barbarian warrior in his little notebook in his mind. What science? This is a ghost. After glaring at him, Sulen kept looking around, trying to find where the ghost was hiding. At this moment, a shadow suddenly appeared, followed by a sharp howl that exploded in everyone's ears. Sulen felt as if his head had been hit hard with a hammer. His brain became dizzy at this moment. Fortunately, this feeling was very short. Sulen endured it in an instant, the spear in his hand flashing with streaks of lightning as it swept across the ghost's body. The lightning exploded and instantly enveloped the ghost. Then, a shrill cry rang out, and the ghost's originally illusory figure quickly dissipated, finally disappearing without a trace. Sulen rubbed his slightly swollen temples. There were still some aftereffects from the ghost's howl of the dead. Even though this attack seemed to kill the enemy through sound, as long as one covered one's ears, in reality, this was only on the surface. The howl of the dead was a type of soul magic. It was used directly on the soul through the power of the soul. It could be said that this thing ignored physical defense. Creatures like ghosts were very unfriendly to pure physical professionals. Their illusory bodies were almost immune to 90% of physical attacks. Only holy water or magical attacks were effective against them. Coupled with the howl of the dead, these things were simply the killers of low-level professionals. How are you guys, Baran? Sulen asked as he looked at the barbarian warriors who were a little unsteady. Not bad, head, just a little pain in the head. The barbarian warrior rubbed his head and grimaced in pain. These barbarians had strong bodies, and their power of the soul was not weak either. Therefore, even though they were hit by a soul attack, they could recover very quickly. If it was someone with a weak body and without corresponding defense measures, even if they did not die, they would have become a fool. After seeing that the barbarian warrior was fine, Sulen went to the place where he had killed the ghost. He saw that there was a black translucent crystal where the ghost had disappeared. This thing was the soul fragment of the ghost. When undead creatures died, there was a certain chance that they would drop this thing. It was said that this was the materialization of spiritual energy. It was a magic material that could be sold to wizards in exchange for Kinnar. Soul energy detected, absorb. Just as he casually picked up this soul fragment, the system prompt sounded in his ears. Sulen's heart skipped a beat, and he chose to absorb. Extracting energy. The energy has been extracted. You have received 2,700 experience points. Not bad. Sulen's eyes lit up. He had received 500 experience points from killing the ghost just now. He did not expect to receive 2,700 experience points after absorbing the soul crystal. This was much more than the experience he had received when he was patrolling and clearing out the kobolds in the wasteland. After the energy had been extracted, the black soul fragment had turned grayish-white. It looked decayed and gray. With a light touch, this soul fragment shattered into countless powder, and then drifted away with the wind without a trace. P.S. Thank you to Ancient Navigator for the tip of 100 coins. Chapter 60. Buzz, after confirming that there was nothing else, Sulen pushed open the half-opened stone door. The firelight shone into the stone door, and everyone could finally see what was inside. This was a stone room that was about 200 square meters. This should be a laboratory. There was a bookshelf against the wall, but because it had been there for a long time, Sulen reached out to take a book. However, as soon as he picked it up, the book turned into a pile of fragments like a dried leaf. These books had been there for too long. Without any protective measures, they were all damaged. There was a thick layer of dust in the room, and there were many spider webs around. It looked very dilapidated. There were also some stone tables on the other side of the room. Many things were placed on the tables. There were some worn-out glassware, strange-looking bottles, and some sealed glassware. They were filled with translucent liquid, and in the liquid, there were limbs of unknown creatures soaking in it. On some of the tables, there were a few unknown skulls, some animal specimens, dried bat corpses, and some unknown black objects that had rotted into a ball. The whole room looked like an evil wizard's terrifying laboratory. This is an abandoned wizard's laboratory? Looking at the scene in front of him, Sulen was pleasantly surprised. It was said that knights were the noble profession, but in reality, wizards were the real noble profession. As long as they were not necromancers, other wizards would be treated like nobles in human countries. If they were willing to join a kingdom, they could immediately become a count with real power. Therefore, there was a saying that all wizards were nobles, but not all nobles were wizards. Every single wizard was a rich man, and their profession burned through a lot of money. Of course, their ability to make money was ridiculous as well. A single low-level magic scroll could easily be sold for hundreds to thousands of gold nars. There were also healing potions and body-strengthening potions that could be made by wizards. Any one of them would fetch a high price. Wizards were also one of the few people in this world who could make rare weapons or rare equipment. Now that they had found a wizard's ruin that had not been searched by anyone, it was obvious that the value inside was very high. After knowing that this was a wizard's laboratory, Sulen became even more cautious. Wizards were not easy to deal with. In order to prevent themselves from being disturbed, they would set up a lot of spells. Who knew if there were any spells in this laboratory? Therefore, he had to be very careful when exploring the ruins of a wizard. Sulen didn't care about those damaged items. He carefully picked up the other items and checked them. Many glassware on the stone table were empty. Although some bottles were covered with corks, the liquid inside had already dried up, leaving only some traces at the bottom of the bottles. There were also some well-sealed potions that contained some black liquid. Sulen did not have any common sense when it came to these suspected potions. This place had been sealed for a long time. Who knew if these potions had expired? Besides, there were too many types of potions. If he took them without knowing their effects, he would not even know how he died. Some of the creature's limbs that had been sealed and soaked for too long had swollen and turned black. Basically, they had lost their effects. Sulen searched through the stone table, but he did not find anything valuable. Leaving the stone table, Sulen searched through the cabinets at the side. The cabinets were divided into many small compartments of different sizes. If he was not mistaken, there should have been a lot of things stored here in the past. However, most of the compartments were empty now. After rummaging through a pile of rubbish, Sulen finally found a crystal bottle that was not bad. He reached out and picked it up. This crystal bottle was well preserved. The light red liquid inside was still clear and transparent. There was even a layer of enchantment on top of the bottle. This should be a relatively expensive potion. However, Sulen did not know much about wizards, so he did not know what kind of potion it was. After putting away the crystal bottle, Sulen continued to search for the next cabinet. However, as soon as he opened it, he felt a weak wave of magic. Oh no, it's a magic trap. Spread out. Sensing the magical wave, Sulen immediately summoned a wind shield to be on guard. The other barbarian warriors also spread out and paid full attention to their surroundings. However, what surprised Su Len was that there were no acid, lightning, frost, or flames that he had expected. Just as Su Len heaved a sigh of relief, a ray of magic light lit up in the room. The next second, an oval-shaped door of light appeared in the room. The oval-shaped door of light flashed with a dark red light. Inside the door was a whirlpool that was constantly rotating. At first glance, it made people feel uncomfortable. Just as everyone was still curious, the teleportation was completed. A 3-meter-tall figure appeared in the stone room. It had a tall body, strong limbs, dark red scales, and an ugly head with 6 eyes. It did not have a nose, and there were some black holes where its nose should have been. It also had a mouth that took up half of its head, filled with sharp and ferocious teeth. Its arms were muscular, and there were 3 side-like claws on each of its arms. With its arrival, the room was filled with a strong smell of sulfur. Although Su Len had never seen this creature before, with its signature claws, he recognized it at a glance. It was a type of intermediate demon, claw demon. Ding! Discovered Abyss Transcendent Monster, Claw Demon. Claw Demon, Abyss Demon, Grade 3. Strength, 21, Agility, 18, Constitution, 19, Spirit, 12. Has spell-like abilities. Skills, Bite, Chain Attack, Pounce, Haste, Curse, etc. Special skills, Demon Skin, Tenacity, Regeneration. As the system notification sounded, a part of the Claw Demon's attributes appeared in front of Su Len. This Claw Demon was an intermediate demon. In the human world, it was equivalent to a Grade 3 profession, a Knight Commander. However, even a Knight Commander would most likely lose in a one-on-one fight with such a demon. Demons were not only strong physically, but they also had spell-like abilities. They were not easy to deal with. However, although this demon was strong, it was unlucky to meet Su Len. Roar! The Claw Demon that had just teleported over roared excitedly after seeing the surrounding environment. After seeing that there were actually some humans around, it couldn't wait to have a good meal. After standing firm, the Claw Demon rushed towards Su Len, who was closest to it. Seeing Su Len's thin and weak appearance, it couldn't wait to try the taste of a human. Chapter 61. The tall sharp Claw Demon waved its sharp claws and pounced at him. The wind it brought with it hit his face, causing him to feel a slight pain. Su Len didn't kill this demon immediately. It was his first time seeing this kind of abyss creature, so he was very curious. His body flashed, and he dodged the Claw Demon's attack. Boom! The heavy stone table was smashed by its claws. Its body flashed, and it continued to chase Su Len. However, its speed was obviously much slower than Su Len's. Every time it was about to hit Su Len would easily dodge it. The whole scene looked very thrilling. The barbarian warriors next to him wanted to help, but they were stopped by Su Len. Even if it was an intermediate demon, it wouldn't last more than 3 minutes against 6 barbarian warriors and a barbarian axe warrior. After realizing that it couldn't catch up to Su Len, the Claw Demon's 6 eyes flashed with blood-red light. Then, a dark red light flashed. The Claw Demon suddenly sped up. The small stone room didn't give them much room to move. Although the Claw Demon's speed was still not as fast as Su Len's, it could already attack him. The 3-meter-tall Claw Demon was very oppressive. Its 2 claws were extremely sharp, and it grabbed the stone table like it was tofu. The 2 claws were like dual weapons, and the attacks were endless. These demons fought all day in the abyss, and fighting had become their instinct. The Claw Demon was only a low-middle demon in the endless abyss. There were higher demons, demon generals, demon lords, and abyss demons above it. The most powerful abyss demons were said to be on par with the gods. After a period of fighting, Su Len also had a general idea of the strength of the Claw Demon, so he no longer dodged. The long spear in his hand swept with the blue electric light. The Claw Demon was hit in an instant before it could react. Its body weighing 250 kilograms was directly swept out, and the electric current on the spear also entered its body. The powerful electric current paralyzed its body, and then Su Len pierced its head with his spear. This demon that just came from the abyss didn't even get to experience the glory of the material world before its soul returned to the river Styx. Congratulations to the host for killing the abyss demon, Claw Demon. You have gained 15,000 experience points. You killed an abyss demon, and your name spread across the wasteland. You've earned the hatred of the demons. Congratulations, host. You have leveled up. You have received 2 free attribute points, 2 skill points, and 1 gold treasure chest. In this battle, you've obtained a forging experience book. He added 2 attribute points to strength, and at this moment, his attributes changed again. Name, Sullen Race. Human level, LV 18, 210718000. Strength, 35 Dexterity, 29 Spirit, 24 Physique, 29 Charm, 19 Skills, omitted, Characteristics, omitted. In this battle, other than the Forging Experience book, there was also a golden treasure chest. The Forging Experience book was for blacksmiths. He planned to go back to the blacksmith shop and find an apprentice to use it. This item could quickly improve his forging skills. The golden treasure chest was directly opened. A golden light flashed, and the golden treasure chest disappeared, replaced by a ball of light. Congratulations, host, you've obtained the Forbidden Magic skill. Forbidden Magic? After hearing the system prompt, Sullen's heart beat faster. He quickly opened the system to check. Forbidden Magic, after the system integrated with the rules of this world, the original, general skill mutated and became a new skill. Forbidden Magic, beginner after use, you can cut off the energy link of a person or creature whose level is not higher than yours. Note, the target's level is higher than the caster's, so the skill is ineffective. This skill is ineffective against legendary wizards. After seeing the skill clearly, Su Len was a little disappointed. This skill could not be used against people who were stronger than him, so its effect was much smaller. Moreover, it was ineffective against legendary wizards. This was within his expectations. After all, legendary wizards could already cast spells without the magic net. For legendary wizards who had come into contact with the rules of the world, forbidden magic was meaningless. Although this forbidden magic skill had a lot of limitations, it did not mean that it was useless. On the contrary, this skill was very powerful. Su Len did not have a clear understanding of his current strength, but he estimated that it should be close to legendary. In this way, all spellcasters, people, or creatures with magic abilities under legendary wizards would be mute when they met him. After spending 2 skill points to learn forbidden magic, Su Len began to check on the unlucky Claw Demon. Although the Claw Demon was an intermediate demon, there were still some things on its body. The demon's skin was good in both strength and toughness. It was said that the skin of the demon lord was not worse than that of a giant dragon. Although the Claw Demon's skin was not that strong, it was still a good leather armor. The most valuable thing on the Claw Demon's body was its pair of claws. This pair of claws was also an extraordinary item. If a wizard with good skills made it, these claws could be made into an extraordinary weapon with sharpness and armor-piercing effect. After leaving the claws and the demon's skin, the rest of the body was thrown aside. Although the demon's body was also a magic material, it was not easy to sell it. Su Len did not have a channel to sell it, so he could only choose to throw it away. Luckily, the value of the Claw Demon's body was not that high. Otherwise, he would be heartbroken. After dealing with the Claw Demon, Su Len continued to look for valuable things in the stone room. After the battle just now, Su Len had confirmed that there were no other traps. Soon, the stone room was searched, and there were no other valuable things found. After finding nothing, Su Len looked at the other door in the stone room. As a wizard's laboratory, it was impossible for him to only have one stone room. Also, wizards like to build treasure vaults to store their treasures or magic tools. This wizard was the same. When he came to the door, Su Len carefully pushed the door. There was no mechanism on the door. After waiting for a while and seeing that there was nothing else, Su Len held the torch and walked inside. The stone room inside was a bedroom. Aside from some beds and other things, there was nothing else. Perhaps these beds were once made of velvet and silk, but after hundreds of years, these things had all become trash that would break at the slightest touch. After walking past the bedroom, Sulen continued to walk to other rooms. Soon, he found the kitchen, training ground, and library. However, he still found very little. He only found 2 books in the library that were not damaged. These 2 books were preserved after some special treatment. One was Demon Identification, and the other was Anatomy. Chapter 62. Sulen flipped through it casually. There were many dissections of demon corpses recorded on it. It seemed like the wizard who built this lab had researched a lot of forbidden knowledge. This also made Sulen understand why the wizard built his lab in this godforsaken place. After searching through these few rooms, Sulen turned his attention to the last door. According to the layout of this lab, the last door was very likely to be the wizard's treasury. As the biggest treasure in this lab, Sulen purposely left it for last. When I arrived at the entrance of the treasury, I was surprised to find that there weren't any magic traps installed on the door. All I had to do was push open the heavy stone door. When I opened the door, I didn't see the mountain of Kinnar that I had imagined. The empty treasury was so clean that it looked as if it had been licked clean by goblins. Sulen looked at the empty treasury with a gloomy face. He could not believe that there was not even a strand of hair here. Sulen did not give up and wondered if this treasury was just a fake one. The real treasury was actually hidden here. Soon, he realized that there was indeed something different in this treasury. For example, the seemingly messy lines on the ground of the treasury. There were also some magic runes carved on many places in the treasury. However, Sulen was not a wizard, so he knew nothing about these things. "Boss, there are words carved here." Just as Sulen was thinking about the meaning of these lines, a barbarian warrior pointed at a statue on the wall of the treasury and shouted. "What words?" Sulen stood up and walked over. "I don't know." The barbarian warrior said confidently. "I told you to learn a long time ago, but you still can't read." Sulen was speechless. Sulen pushed the warrior away and began to look at the words carved on the statue. "Other than death, you will gain nothing. F***ck. Sulen was so angry that he slapped the statue. This bastard did it on purpose. He gave up this stupid lab on his own accord and left it here to scam people. Sulen finally understood why this lab was so well preserved, but there were so few things in it. After seeing this line of words, he knew that the wizard was trying to tell him that he was scamming him. It was just like when you finally found the treasure after going through untold hardships and narrowly escaping death. You were about to become a millionaire and reach the pinnacle of your life. In the end, the person who buried the treasure only left you an empty box. Anyone would probably explode. At this moment, Sulen could not help but be angry. If the wizard in this lab was still alive, Sulen would definitely beat him up until he could not take care of himself. The statue on the stone wall that Sulen slapped activated an obscure mana. Immediately, rays of light appeared on the ground in the center of the treasury. The mana wave of mana here quickly caught Sulen's attention. A summoning circle again? Doesn't this damn wizard know how to come up with something new? Looking at the dimensional door that was rapidly forming, Sulen moved his wrist. This summoning circle came at the right time. He was just about to vent his anger when a punching bag came. The dark red light of teleportation appeared, and a mysterious whirlpool appeared in the treasury. In the next second, a curvaceous female creature with a beautiful face appeared in front of Sulen. This female creature had a pair of demonic wings and a pair of small horns on her head. Her face was beautiful and full of charm. Her clothes were also extremely bold. They could not even be called clothes. They were even smaller than the hottest bikini swimsuit in his previous world. Two pieces of cloth that were not much bigger than coins covered the important parts of her body. Her lower body was like a few ropes. This was the embodiment of desire. She seemed to be able to satisfy whatever one wanted. Sulen's heart was also burning at this moment. He looked at the female creature with a burning gaze. This is a material plane? My luck is so good. A lazy and seductive female voice sounded. Hearing it, Sulen felt as if there was a small hand constantly teasing his heartstrings. There are so many strong males. Are you willing to serve me? The seductive voice sounded in his ears again. At the same time, there was a voice in his heart that kept encouraging him to say yes. Resisting the impulse to agree, Su Luan instantly mobilized the power in his body, and an electric current rushed straight up along his spine. At the moment when the electric current passed, Su Luan's originally somewhat confused expression instantly sobered up. Succubus. After regaining consciousness, Su Len immediately remembered the origin of the creature in front of him. According to legend, this was a type of demon that was born from the soul of a human female. It had all the advantages of a female and could be said to be the dream partner of a male. However, most of those who met them would become their slaves. I actually got rid of it. Has my charm decreased? Just as Su Len regained his calm, the succubus said with some surprise. In her opinion, among the 7 human males in the room, this one was the thinnest and smallest and should be the weakest. She did not expect this weakest human to get rid of her charm. I also did not expect to summon a succubus this time. I almost failed miserably. Su Len looked back and forth at the succubus's body. He had to admit that this body was the most outstanding one he had seen since he came to this world. In particular, the seductive charm on her body made Su Len want to have a good fight with her for 360 rounds. I'm getting more and more interested in you. Take him down. Noticing Sulen's gaze, the succubus smiled slightly. The whip in her hand lashed out, and the barbarian warriors that had been controlled rushed towards Su Len. Damn it, these guys. Their willpower is so low. I'll train them properly when I get back. Seeing the 6 barbarian warriors rushing over, Sulen's face darkened. This was the first time his subordinates had betrayed him. He made up his mind to teach these barbarians a lesson when he got back. After making up his mind, his hands were not careless. Blue lightning jumped back and forth on the spear. Seeing the 6 barbarians rushing over, Su Len quickly whipped them. As a result, these barbarians flew back at an even faster speed than before. The electric current wrapped around their bodies paralyzed their bodies. It seemed that they could not move for a while. Your turn. After dealing with the barbarians, Su Len turned his gaze to the succubus. Seeing Su Len easily deal with the barbarian warriors, the succubus also knew that she had misjudged him. This human in front of her was not the weakest, he was clearly a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus. Damn it, why am I so unlucky? I finally became an adult and was lucky enough to come to the main material plane. How did I meet such a monster? The succubus cursed her bad luck in her heart. P.S. Thank you to the heavy dragoon for the 100 Chidian coins tip. Chapter 63. Succubi weren't very strong. They didn't like to fight head-on, but that didn't mean they didn't know how to fight. After seeing that her subordinates were all subdued, the succubi had to do it herself. The whip covered in barbs whipped towards Su Len. Every succubi was a master of whips and was proficient in the art of binding. However, she met Su Len. This time, she kicked an iron plate. The long spear in his hand easily deflected the succubi's whip. Then, with a sweep, the succubi flapped her wings and dodged quickly. Even though the succubi dodged quickly, she was still grazed by the lightning on the long spear. The lightning flashed, and the succubi's arm was slightly numb. Then, it returned to normal. In that short moment of contact, Chris clearly knew that she was no match for him, so she already had plans to escape. She swung her whip and prepared to cast an advanced teleportation spell to escape. As soon as the energy gathered, Su Luan sensed it. Without even thinking about it, he directly threw out a forbidden magic spell. The gathering energy was interrupted in an instant. Chris only felt that her body was covered by an invisible barrier, which directly cut off the energy link between her and the surroundings. The advanced teleportation spell was also interrupted. Forcibly interrupting a spell would cause a serious backlash. Although the succubi's spells came from their innate abilities, the backlash still made her brain hurt. Seeing that the succubi's spell was interrupted, Sulen didn't slow down. He appeared beside her in an instant and swept his long spear, knocking her down from the air. The lightning on the long spear instantly made her lose her ability to resist. "Don't kill me. I surrender." Chris immediately begged for mercy after being hit. She looked at Sulen with pitiful eyes and her body also posed seductively. Obviously, the succubi was very good at using her advantages. Sulen didn't continue. He originally planned to capture this succubi alive. He still wanted to study the abyssal demons in depth and understand their weaknesses. "You can surrender, but how can I be sure that you won't betray me? You demons don't have much credibility." Sulen rubbed his chin with one hand and played with the long spear with the other. The long spear in his hand faintly swept around her body. "Master, I can sign a contract with you. As long as you sign the contract, you won't have to worry about betrayal." She already knew that Sulen wasn't a wizard, so it wouldn't be easy to sign a contract with him. Signing a contract, huh? That's not a bad idea. The problem is, I'm not a wizard, and I can't find any wizards here. Crazy sighed in relief when she heard that Sulen couldn't find any wizards. Succubi are also weak and useless. Since we can't find the wizard, we might as well kill him. Sulen shook his head and raised his spear. "Master, don't kill me. I will be loyal to you and will never betray you. I can dance and warm your bed. Please." Feeling the cold air, Chris was so scared that her soul almost left her body. She hurriedly begged for mercy. "Loyal?" Sulen laughed in his heart. He would be a fool to believe the demon's promise. His goal was to make the succubus join his team willingly for the time being. Ding! Succubus Chris has requested to join your team. Do you accept? A familiar notification sounded in his ears. Accept. After Sulen agreed, Chris was added to his system. He opened Chris's attributes and saw her loyalty value. It was a pitiful 55. Such a low loyalty value meant that Chris could betray him at any time. However, Sulen didn't want to give her the chance. Succubus Chris looked at Sulen pitifully. She no longer looked as seductive as before. Chris felt that she was too unlucky. As a succubus who had just reached adulthood, she was planning to charm a few dumb vrocks to become her subordinates. However, when she went out, she sensed that someone was summoning a demon with a summoning spell. She happened to be summoned over. Originally, coming to the material plane wasn't bad. At least it was more interesting than being surrounded by lava, poisonous gas, and all sorts of demons that only knew how to destroy things. However, just as she was excitedly coming to the material plane, she was taught a lesson by a human and now, she was his captive. But I won't give up. With my charm, I will make him submit to my whip. After confirming that Chris had joined his team, Sulen moved his spear away. Sulen was quite happy that Chris had joined his team. Today's battle had made him realize the barbarian's weakness. He was going to give the barbarian special training, and Chris would be their instructor. Of course, other than that, Chris would also be the Lord's personal maid. As a noble with real power in his own territory, how could he not have a personal maid? Now that he had Chris, it was much better. As for Sulen saying that Chris was beautiful, that was something he would never admit. Am I, Sulen, such a shallow person? Yes, I am such a shallow person. After Chris joined the team, Sulen took out the self-created hero template that he had obtained from killing the raging wind tiger. This was the reason why Sulen dared to accept the succubus without signing a contract. The self-created hero template could allow a normal person in the same faction to become a hero with their own characteristics and skills. This item had no effect on the original hero, but it had one effect, which was that the loyalty of the hero would be locked at 100 after using the self-created hero template. In other words, as long as Sulen gave this item to Chris, she would not be able to betray him for the rest of her life. The self-created hero template was a ball of light the size of a fist. The ball of light was as light as a feather, but it attracted everyone's attention as soon as it appeared. Come here. Sulen glanced at the succubus and said. Chris hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she walked over obediently. Sulen tapped on the ball of light lightly and chose to use it on the succubus Chris. The ball of light suddenly shattered into countless stars and instantly enveloped the succubus Chris. Ding, you have used self-created hero template on the succubus Chris. Self-created hero template has activated hero character trait, talent. Horsemanship, hidden weapon, throwing, sword, spear, archery, charm, valor, regeneration, calm, recovery. Sulen chose charm without hesitation. How could a succubus be called a succubus if she did not choose charm? Target has been detected to have charm talent. Charm talent fusion has been upgraded to advanced charm. Hearing the system notification, Sulen secretly sighed in relief. It seemed that his guess was right. Next, he chose a skill. There were also many skills to choose from. Sulen chose summoning. Target has been detected to have summoning magic. Summoning skill fusion has been upgraded to advanced summoning. Countless starlight fused into Chrissy's body. This situation lasted for a few seconds before it ended. When the light dissipated, Chris' body was revealed. P.S. Thank you to Shu Wooly for the 200 starting coins tip. Thank you to War and Death for the 200 starting coins tip. Chapter 64. Master. Chris's sweet voice rang in his ears. Just her voice alone made him feel as if his heart was being scratched by a cat's claws. How do you feel? Sulen asked with a smile as he looked at the increasingly beautiful Chris in front of him. Thank you for your gift, Master. Chris feels as if she has been reborn. Chris bowed to Sulen. Her body formed a sexy and seductive curve, which made Sulen envious. Sensing Sulen's burning gaze, Chris couldn't help but smile. Then, she adjusted her body to make it even more attractive. Okay, get up. Sulen suppressed the fire in his heart and took out a spare set of clothes for Chris to change into. This little vixen's every move was very seductive. If she wore such skimpy clothes again, Sulen was worried that he wouldn't be able to control himself. Now that she had become his exclusive property, she naturally couldn't wear such skimpy clothes. Of course, this was an exception when they were alone. Yes, Master. Chris took the clothes from Sulen and put them on. After becoming a hero, Chris had transformed into a human. The small horns on her head and the wings on her back had disappeared. She looked exactly like a human. Compared to before, Chris had become even more beautiful. The seductive feeling on her beautiful face had disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a strange charm. Her facial features were exquisite, her brows were picturesque, her eyes were dark red, her skin was white, and her black hair hung down to her waist. Just looking at her made one's heart flutter. The loose robe on her body still couldn't cover Chris's curvaceous figure. The loose robe was very loose and looked like old pajamas on her body. However, Chris found a ribbon and tied it around her waist. All of a sudden, the originally large and ugly robe became beautiful. The astonishing curve of the upper part of the robe was already enough to make people envious. When it reached the waist, it suddenly became slender. The beautiful curve below the waist, the slender legs, and the entire figure were vividly outlined. Her slender waist had a kind of amazing beauty. At a glance, Sulen immediately thought of a kind of creature, a snake. This was a real water snake waist. After putting on the robe, Chris stretched her arms behind her back. Her chest rose to an amazing angle. Then, she used both hands to lift up her beautiful black hair. Her every move was naturally seductive. Master, I'm done. Chris found a rope and tied her hair. Then, she tilted her head and said. Then remove your charm. Sulen came back to his senses and pointed at the barbarian warriors who were still lying on the ground. The barbarian warriors finally recovered after the charm spell was removed. However, their faces were as red as pig's liver, clearly feeling that they couldn't lift their heads after being controlled by Crazy's charm spell. Ding! Congratulations to the host for successfully subduing the succubus, Chris, and obtaining the first self-created hero. The host is rewarded with Charm +2 and a silver treasure chest. Sulen opened the system panel. There was a hero in his panel. There were 3 names listed. The first was Johnson, the second was Boulder, and the third was Chris. He clicked on Chris's name. Chris's attribute panel appeared in front of him. Name: Chris, adult, race, succubus, abyss demon, high demon, rank, elite succubus strength, 16 agility, 21 spirit, 25 vitality, 20 charm, 28. Succubi are born with a beautiful appearance. Their charm is amazing. Not only is it effective on the opposite sex, they have amazing charm and can easily gain the favor of others. Negotiation +5, command, 50 characteristics, talent high charm, tenacity, minor damage reduction, 10 and below damage, night vision 20 meters, resistance to poison, acid, ice, and fire 15, magic resistance 20, telepathy 30 meters. Skills: high summoning, high teleportation, energy absorption, language proficiency, detection, suggestion, spell-like abilities, dancing level 14, negotiation level 12, deception level 12, rope, binding, level 8, trainer level 7. High charm: after using this skill, one or many targets can be charmed. If the target's willpower fails, they will become her slave. High summoning: can summon 1 high demon or 5 intermediate demons to fight for her. Weapon proficiency: sword weapon 83, whip 178. Looking at Chris's attribute panel, Sulen was surprised. He didn't expect Chris to have so many things. Besides the basic skills, Sulen also found some interesting things, such as dancing and rope. From Chris's attributes, she was more of an agility-based hero. Her strength was not as high as the barbarian warrior, but her charm was as high as 28 points. It could be said that she had reached the point where she could bring disaster to the country. Although Chris's charm was high, it was at most 22 points. However, after becoming a hero, all her attributes had increased. Her charm had increased the most. With a high charm, she naturally became more beautiful. Moreover, using high charm was more effective. If she were to use it on Sulen again, Sulen might not be able to withstand it. After looking at Chris's attributes, Sulen opened the silver treasure chest that he had just received. A light flashed and Sulen heard a system prompt. Congratulations, host. You have received a black mane horse. The original silver treasure chest was replaced by a doll-like black horse. Black mane horse, mount. Summon a black mane horse after use. Speed +3. Without summoning the black mane horse, Sulen asked everyone to leave the laboratory. When they left, Sulen kindly restored the door and the undamaged mechanisms. He also repaired some of the mechanisms that could be repaired. Even the traces on the ground were cleaned up. He tried his best to restore the place to its original state and let the ruins quietly wait for the next adventure to come. After spending some time to deal with it, Sulen left with the barbarian warrior and his personal maid. Sulen took out the black mane horse from his personal storage and chose to summon it. A light flashed and a group of tall and handsome black warhorses appeared in front of them. The warhorses had slender limbs and beautiful muscles. The fur on their bodies was as smooth as satin. Their eyes were also very lively. One could tell at a glance that this was a good horse. The barbarian warrior was curious about the horses that suddenly appeared, but soon lost interest. On the other hand, Chris looked at Sulen with sparkling eyes. Sulen jumped onto the horse and stretched out his arms to carry Chris onto the horse's back. Feeling the amazing elasticity in his arms, Sulen's heart couldn't help but beat faster. The journey back was very smooth. They didn't meet any goblins or gnolls. When the sky turned dark, the group finally returned to the town. Chapter 65. Master, is this your territory? Chris curled up in Sullen's arms and looked up. What's wrong? You think it's too small? Sulan looked at the town he built and felt proud. Not bad, Chris praised. For a succubus who had long reached the pinnacle of observing people's expressions, she knew how to please her master. Master, your most loyal servant welcomes you back. Just then, a goblin ran over and knelt down. It was the goblin, Floor. Master, the sugar beet seeds have all been planted. Baron, give him the sugar beet seeds we collected this time. Sulan asked Baron to give him the sugar beet seeds. The sugar beet planting area had been expanding recently. With the technology to extract sugar, it had become an important resource in the territory. It was a quiet night. 15,000 words omitted. When he woke up the next day, it was already noon. When he got up, Chris was still resting. Last night's battle was a bit fierce. Although the succubus was fearless in bed, Chris was just an adult. She was no match for Su Luan, who had watched countless movies and had no idea what to do in terms of theoretical knowledge or physical strength. Of course, Chris's growth was fast. After all, she was talented. Master, you're awake. Sullen's movement woke Chris up. The succubus laid on Sullen's back and hugged his neck. He felt a pair of soft hands on his back. The sun is up. It's time to get up. Sulan patted Chris's smooth, jade-like skin. Chris got into her role very quickly. She helped Sulan put on his clothes. It had been 10 years since Sulan came to this world. It was the first time he enjoyed the treatment of a noble. Chris even helped him wash his face and brush his teeth. She even tried a facial cleanser when he washed his face. He had to admit that after using the facial cleanser, his skin was smoother and fairer. Under Chris's help, he put on his clothes, washed up, and went to the dining hall for breakfast. Breakfast was oatmeal, eggs, and white bread. It was called eggs, but it was actually water bird eggs. There were too many water birds in the reeds and many eggs were laid every day. Breakfast was prepared by a barbarian ant. It was said that she was the best cook in the territory. Although Chris was a succubus, she was completely different from other abyss demons. In the abyss, succubi were one of the few demons with excellent intelligence. Normal demons, even if they reached the legendary level like the demon warlord, would still be reckless and not use their brains. Only after becoming a demon lord would they increase their intelligence. Succubi were the rare demons who liked to use schemes. They were very similar to devils. Su Luan directly handed over many things in the territory to Chris. With her loyalty as high as 100, he didn't have to worry about her betrayal. Chris was still very interested in dealing with the affairs of the territory. Su Luan was now tired of all kinds of trivial matters in the territory every day, so he just let Chris take care of them. From today onwards, Chris became Sullen's personal maid and the territory's internal affairs officer. After breakfast, a barbarian warrior hurried in. Boss, our caravan is back. Back? How much food did you bring back? Sullen's eyes lit up and hurriedly asked. 20 carriages and a caravan came with them. Sulan was stunned. He immediately got up and walked out. He walked to the town's market with the Lord's guards. When he arrived at the market, he saw a large number of goblins and gnolls loading and unloading food from afar. Seeing Sulan arrive, Xian, who was directing the caravan to unload the goods, immediately ran over. Sir, fortunately, I didn't disappoint. I brought back the food, Xian said respectfully. Was the journey smooth? It was smooth. Lord Johnson and Lord Giant escorted us all the way. They took care of all the vermin. That's good. How much food did you bring back? Sulan asked the key question. According to your request, all the jewelry we sold this time was used to buy food. There's a total of 50,000 kilograms of food. Sir, I also took the initiative to buy a group of slaves this time, Xian said nervously. 50,000 kilograms of food is enough. As for the slaves, they're used to supplement the territory's population. Sulen didn't care about the slaves. His territory was lacking in people. There are 10 slaves in this group who know how to make wine. They came with their families. Monsignor, do you want to meet them? We'll talk about that later. By the way, what's up with the caravan that came with you? Sulen asked. That caravan belongs to the Skylark Chamber of Commerce. The goods I bought this time are from them. They heard that you, Monsignor, have successfully developed a territory in the wastelands, so they came with us. They want to cooperate with us. Xian pointed at the caravan not far away and introduced it. Sulen nodded. He had heard of the Skylark Chamber of Commerce. It was one of Count Jacob's businesses, and the emblem of the Jacob family was a skylark. Count Jacob also had a fief in the Northlands and was considered a count with real power. Since they want to do business with us, let's meet them. Sulen nodded. Soon, Xian came over with a middle-aged man in his 40s. Good day, Sir Sulen. The middle-aged man bowed to Sulen. Good day. Are you the representative of the Skylark Chamber of Commerce? Sulen asked with a smile. Yes, Sir Sulen. I am the representative of the Skylark Chamber of Commerce, Robert, the merchant said respectfully. Your warriors are very brave and powerful. Of course. They are the best warriors. Sulen brought Robert to a meeting room in the market. A servant brought them tea. What business does the Skylark Chamber of Commerce want to do with us? I heard that your territory produces fine iron weapons, so I want to buy some. Of course, if you need anything, you can also order from us. The Skylark Chamber of Commerce has trading stations all over the Kingdom of Florence. We can provide you with all kinds of goods, Robert said respectfully. You want to buy weapons? Sure, someone will discuss the price and style with you later. Sulen nodded and agreed to trade with them. Thank you very much for your generosity. We have prepared 2 carts of food as a gift for you. Please accept it. Robert's attitude was very humble. It seemed that he had seen the strength of Johnson and his barbarian warriors on the way here. Your Excellency Sulen, our caravan has brought other goods this time. Is there anything you need? Make a list of your goods and send it to me. If I need it, I will send someone to buy it. Sulen nodded. P.S. Thank you to 9 Sniper SSR, The Unknown World, People Who Don't Know, Tyrant Baby for the 100 Chidian coins. Thank you to Goodwill Lies for the 200 Chidian coins. Thank you to Heavy Dragon Rider for the 500 Chidian coins. Thank you to Desert Bandit for the 1000 Chidian coins. Chapter 66. Sulen did not directly take out the white sugar to trade with the Skylark Chamber of Commerce. In his eyes, white sugar was a luxury item. White sugar was different from salt. It was fine even if ordinary people did not eat sugar, so sugar was basically prepared for the nobles. Robert's caravan brought a variety of daily necessities. In addition to a small amount of food, there were also wine, tea, and so on. Their arrival solved many problems in the territory. When Sulen came to develop the territory, he had limited funds, so he only bought the most important materials and did not bring anything else. The simplest example was clothes. The wilderness did not produce clothes, so when the clothes were damaged, many people wore leather clothes. These things were hard and smelly, uncomfortable to wear, and smelled bad. Before Robert came here, he deliberately learned about the situation in Sulen's territory from Xian. Then he prepared the goods, which were naturally very popular. Poor Sulen had already run out of money for the first few purchases, so he could only barter to buy Robert's goods. Fortunately, the blacksmith had made a lot of armor and weapons during this time, so he could trade with Robert. Robert was very curious about Northgard Castle. It was a small town about 300 miles away from Blackstone City. From what he could remember, there weren't many territories that could survive for more than 3 months in the wasteland. The few that could survive for 3 months and finally gain a foothold in the wasteland were all heavily in debt. Every year, they would need a large amount of money. After all, maintaining a regular army of more than 1,000 people in the wasteland was just too expensive. But Northgard Castle was different. After arriving here, Robert's first impression was that it was clean and orderly. Yes, it was clean and orderly. Even in the royal city of Florence, except for the noble district and the wealthy district, it was common for people to urinate and defecate everywhere. The streets in the city were also muddy, and no one knew when human excrement would fall from the sky. The town was unexpectedly clean. The streets were neat and tidy, and the roads were paved with stones. Some places were even paved with stone slabs. There was no garbage on the streets, and the pedestrians did not throw away their garbage. Even the goblin slaves and gnoll slaves did the same. Later, he learned that this was the request of Lord Sulen, and those who violated the rules would be severely punished. They would have to clean the streets and toilets under the supervision of others with shackles. There were also those who were caught urinating and defecating everywhere. Not only would they have to pay fines and do hard labor, but they would also be hung up and beaten. Those who refused to change their ways would also have their tools confiscated. There was a bathroom at the corner of every street. Everyone had to go to the bathroom to relieve themselves. In addition to being clean and tidy, there were many rules here. For example, the road was divided into two in the middle, and everyone had to walk on the right side. Although the whole town didn't look big, it was orderly. Several roads divided the town into several parts, and all the houses were of the same style. Although it didn't look good, it looked very neat. Some of these houses were already occupied, but most of them were still empty. Although each house was not big, with only 3 rooms, the layout was very reasonable. The houses facing the street were all 2-story attics. These houses should be shops. There were also drainage ditches on both sides of the town's roads, and there were also special sewers inside the houses. There were more people living in the south of the town, and the other places were very empty. Many of the open spaces were built with fences, which looked like reserved places. No one was allowed to get close to the town's barracks, and the Lord's mansion was also prohibited from getting close. However, the square was free to come and go. Compared to other towns and cities, not only were there fewer residents, but the number of soldiers was also shockingly small. For a pioneer town like this to establish itself in the wilderness, it would need at least 800 soldiers. But what about this town? There were only less than 100 barbarian warriors. Even if these barbarian warriors were strong, there were too few of them. In a large-scale battle, the barbarians could be drowned by the sea of soldiers. But even now, this town was still alive and well. This made people think that they had some kind of trump card. However, these barbarian warriors were indeed very strong. The barbarian warrior named Johnson on the way here was very likely to be a knight captain. Robert didn't expect that in such a remote place, there would be an immortal knight that surpassed knights and grand knights. If he was willing to pledge his loyalty to the kingdom, he could at least become a viscount. Apart from these, what surprised him even more was that this town had a large number of slaves. Apart from the serfs, there were also more than 1,000 goblins, kobolds, and gnolls. The number of slaves was already several times the population of the town, but none of them had escaped. There were very few free people here, and most of them were the Lord's slaves. However, the slaves here were completely different from those in other cities. In other places, the slaves were not very enthusiastic about their work. Most of the time, they had to be whipped by supervisors. However, the slaves here were very enthusiastic and didn't need to be whipped at all. After discovering this, Robert was very surprised. After asking some people, he found out that the Lord of Sulen had promised that as long as the slave worked hard for the territory for 5 years, he would pardon the slave and let him become a free person. Robert was stunned when he heard the news. After all, the slaves were his personal property. Wasn't it enough to make the slaves work hard with the whip of the supervisor? Why did he want to release the slaves? Did he think that he had too much money? Robert couldn't understand this at all. They even established a contribution system for the slaves. They could earn points by working hard every day, or by joining the army and participating in battles. Only when the points were enough would the slaves be set free. In fact, the reason Su Len did this was to increase the number of free people in the town. After all, if a slave knew that he would always be a slave, how could he expect the slave to work hard? It was impossible. Su Len used this method to successfully motivate the slaves. Even if the slaves became free people 5 years later, they would still have nothing. They would have to continue working for Su Len in order to get paid. It was just a more subtle way of exploitation. Aside from these, what Robert was most curious about was the city's workshops. There was a blacksmith shop by the river outside the city. It was a place where weapons and equipment were produced. However, when Robert wanted to enter, he was stopped by someone. There were a few other places like this. One of them was a workshop next to the Lord's castle. It was also guarded by barbarian warriors. Chapter 67. Robert didn't investigate the town's secrets. He didn't believe that anyone who could establish a foothold here and enslave so many gnomes and gnolls was a simple character. If someone discovered his secrets out of curiosity, he didn't think he'd be able to escape unscathed. After all, there were at least 8, if not 10, merchant groups that went missing in the wilderness every year. In a place like the northern wastelands, there was no need to destroy the corpses after death. The gnomes, gnolls, and gnolls in the wilderness would destroy all traces. What surprised Robert was that the person in charge of the territory was Sullen's personal maid. She was also very beautiful. Robert swore that she was one of the prettiest women he'd ever seen in his life. Also, he'd traded the goods with her at the lowest price. During the negotiation, he'd been led by the nose. In the end, he'd agreed without thinking. By the time he'd realized it, the goods had already been traded. Su Len was lying in a rocking chair, sipping the black tea he'd just bought from Robert. Chris was wearing a black and white maid outfit. She knelt to Sullen's right. The loose maid outfit didn't look bloated on her at all. Her tall and slender body was faintly discernible under the skirt. Her white skin looked like beautiful jade. She had an elegant temperament. She was completely like a well-educated noble lady. This is all the information on Robert? Su Len took a sip of the black tea and chuckled. Yes, master. This Robert has already told me about how he peeked at the neighbor's sister bathing when he was young. Chris gracefully took the teacup and refilled Sullen's. Since we know his background, then let's deal with him, Su Len said after some thought. Other than selling some white sugar to Robert, have Xian take the merchant group to Cult. I need to let more people know about white sugar. Yes, master, Chris said respectfully. Su Len looked at Chris with interest. Looks like you're adapting well. Does master like it? Chris tilted her head and smiled seductively. Not bad. Su Len smiled. By the way, don't put milk and white sugar in the next tea. Chris found Sullen's request a little strange. To be honest, she had just made the black tea, and it tasted a little bitter. For this reason, she even asked Robert how to drink black tea. Then, according to the way the nobles in Florence drank their tea, she added fresh milk and sugar into the cup of tea to make it sweet, thick, and smooth. But judging from Sullen's expression, he didn't like this kind of tea. Chris didn't know what was so good about the bitter black tea, but Su Len liked it very much. How much sugar did master sell to Robert this time? Chris asked. How much sugar do we have in total? Last night, there were 600 bags of white sugar in the warehouse of the sugar refinery, and each bag was 1 kilogram. Sell him 50 kilograms of white sugar, and the price is 50 kinner per kilogram, Su Len said after thinking for a moment. Then he put down the teacup and stretched. After this transaction, tell Robert to bring some daily necessities next time. Clothes, blankets, pillows, and so on. If you need anything, tell him to bring it. Ever since he came to the wastelands 2 months ago, he had almost forgotten the large velvet bed he used to have. Now that there was a sugar trade, he naturally wouldn't let himself suffer. And with Chris as his housekeeper, Su Len was finally freed from the tedious and repetitive labor. After listening to Chris's report, Su Len went to the training field in the Lord's castle. This was a field he had specially built for daily training. Ever since he came to this world, he rarely stopped his daily training. Although the daily training didn't give him much experience, it could increase his weapon proficiency. In the system, when a weapon's proficiency reached a certain level, he would receive a sure kill skill. These sure kill skills were very powerful, and unlike skills that consumed magic, they could be used with just a bit of stamina. Sullen's weapon of highest proficiency was the spear, followed by the long sword. He only touched on the other weapons slightly. After all, his energy and time were limited, and it was impossible to raise the proficiency of all weapons. When the space was small or indoors, he was used to using the long sword. Of course, he was best at the spear. Men were born to be good with the spear, and they had a natural talent for it. Moreover, if they trained well with the spear, it would be twice as effective against female enemies. Just look at Chris now, she was very obedient. Mr. Zeon, is there anything Miss Chris wants from me today? Robert grabbed Zeon's hand, and with his other hand, he secretly stuffed a heavy bag of money into Zeon's hand. Zeon shook the bag in his hand, and the pleasant sound of a kinnor rang out from inside. His face bloomed like a chrysanthemum. Brother Robert, don't worry. This is definitely a good thing, and a very good thing. After putting the heavy bag of money into his pouch, Zeon led Robert to the Lord's residence. Along the way, Robert was thinking hard about the benefits. He couldn't help but ask Zeon a few times, but Zeon only smiled and shook his head. Soon, the two arrived at the gates of the Lord's residence. Zeon notified the barbarian warrior guarding the gates, and only entered after receiving permission. Beautiful Miss Chris, good afternoon. Robert bowed seriously. He didn't dare to underestimate this beautiful woman now. The deal a few days ago had left him with lingering fear. No need to be so polite, Mr. Robert. Please have a seat, Chris said with a smile, and the whip in her hand cracked loudly. Then, a barbarian girl walked in and brought 2 cups of tea. Thank you. Robert sat on the chair, but didn't drink the tea. Instead, he asked directly, Miss Chris, may I know why you've called me here today? There are indeed some matters. Chris leaned lazily on the chair, the bright red fingernails on her slender white fingers particularly alluring. You'll know once you try that cup of tea. Although Robert was a little curious, he still picked up the teacup. The tea was light red, and it was the black tea he had sold not long ago. He blew on it carefully, and then took a sip. A sweet taste rushed to his taste buds. This is honey? Robert's eyes lit up. No, honey has a faint sour taste, and this cup of tea is completely sweet. Is this white sugar? Mr. Robert, it is white sugar, Chris said with a smile. This is what we're going to talk about today. How about it? Are you interested? P.S. Thank you, Eat Me Ku, for the 2,000 Chidian coins tip. Thank you, Chang Ease Ho E, for the 500 Chidian coins tip. Thank you, Cold Flame, for the 500 Chidian coins tip. Chapter 68. You have white sugar here? Robert asked in surprise. Of course. Chrissy nodded. Didn't you drink it just now? Robert looked at Chris in surprise. This pioneering territory deep in the wilderness actually had white sugar. One had to know that there weren't many places in the kingdom of Florence that produced brown sugar, and white sugar was even rarer. Now, this small town with less than 1,000 people actually produced white sugar. Robert quickly regained his composure. He realized that he was going to be lucky this time. After sorting out his emotions, Robert continued, Then, Miss Chrissy, how do you plan to trade for the white sugar? Tell me what you think first. Chrissy played with the leather whip in her hand without looking up. We are willing to buy all the white sugar in your territory. We can even sign a contract. From now on, we are willing to buy all the white sugar in Sir Sullen's territory at a high price. At the same time, we will give you a 20% discount on all the resources you need, Robert said. All white sugar? Robert, your Skylark Merchant Guild is quite greedy. Chrissy shook her head. You want to monopolize the white sugar trade? You better give up on that idea. Robert wasn't surprised. As long as one wasn't an idiot, they wouldn't let a merchant guild monopolize all the white sugar. He still felt a little regretful. How much white sugar can you sell us? We will be selling 50 pounds of white sugar this time. The price for each pound is 50 kinnar, Chrissy said with a smile. 50 pounds of white sugar. Robert was shocked. 50 pounds wasn't a lot, but Cult City only produced about 60 to 70 pounds of white sugar a year. Now, it had doubled. No, 50 pounds is too little, and the price is too high. You should know that the price of white sugar in Cult City is 30 kinnar. If we follow this price, we won't be able to earn a single copper. We'll lose money. Robert shook his head. Mr. Robert, do you think I don't know the price of white sugar? Crazy glanced at him and continued, 30 kinnar is indeed the market price, but that's the price of white sugar. You should know how much white sugar is distributed, right? 15 caddies a year. That's all the nobles in Calent get. What's the price of the rest of the white sugar? Because the production of white sugar was very low, half of the production of white sugar in the Kingdom of Florence was directly distributed to the nobles. Every noble had a fixed share of the white sugar, and the price of the white sugar was also fixed. There were more than 100 nobles in Calent City. With so many nobles sharing the 15 kilograms of sugar, each person would not even get half a kilogram. This amount was naturally not enough. However, if he wanted more white sugar, he would have to go to the market to buy white sugar. Of course, the price of white sugar in the market was much higher. The lowest price would be doubled. Moreover, the supply did not meet the demand. Besides, do you think we will lack partners? As long as we release the news of the sugar, those chambers of commerce will definitely flock to us, so we need to know where we stand. The white sugar trade had just begun in Northtown Castle. Xian also brought a caravan to Calent City. The development of the territory required a lot of resources and people, and Sulen planned to rely on the white sugar trade. In fact, only with a stable trade could a territory develop. For example, Sulen's territory. If there was a trade, more caravans would come to do business. If the caravans wanted to come to Northtown Castle, they would have to pass through the dangerous wilderness, so they had to hire guards. In this way, each caravan would have at least 100 people. The arrival of these people also increased the consumption of the locals. Soon, all kinds of hotels and taverns would appear in the town. The prosperity of the economy would attract more people. If they wanted to develop here, they would have to buy a property. The houses and land that Sulen built would also become popular. The arrival of these people would also provide a lot of tax revenue for the territory. In this way, Sulen's territory would form a virtuous cycle. Only then could the territory be considered a success. At noon, the people who had been busy all morning were resting. The women and children had already prepared a sumptuous lunch. The barbarian women were not very good at cooking. They were best at stewing. They put all kinds of meat and other food into a big pot, added water and salt, and then simmered until it was ready. The most common food in the territory was potatoes. Fortunately, it was potatoes. Otherwise, with the barbarian women's cooking, the food they made would be a disaster. Potatoes stewed with fish, potatoes stewed with beef, potatoes stewed with lamb, and so on. The barbarian warriors did not have high requirements for food. As for the goblins, kobolds, and gnolls, they were lucky to be able to eat as slaves. Sulen really missed the various delicacies of his past life. After 2 days of rain, the territory became muddy. The 2 days of autumn rain brought a slight chill. Under the Lord's orders, the serfs were seizing the time to farm. The Lord's promise gave the serfs hope again. As the poor people of this era, their requirements were actually very low. Sulen only gave them a faint hope, and they would work hard for it. As long as they worked hard, they would be able to eat their fill. Although there were only a few people living in a room, the room was dry and warm. It would not leak when it rained. There was a small room to shelter them from the wind and rain. The Lord also promised that as long as they worked hard for 5 years, they would be able to regain their freedom. If they continued to work, they would even be rewarded with land and houses. This was simply a gift for poor serfs like them. At the beginning of autumn, after the continuous autumn rain, the heat in the air had mostly dissipated. The potatoes planted in the fields had already sprouted. The first batch had already grown green leaves. These potatoes were the food for the northern castle to survive the winter. Other than these, the most common thing in the northern castle's warehouse was dried salted fish. These dried salted fish were specially made to replenish meat during the winter. There were also some dried meat that was already made. However, with the arrival of autumn, there would be less and less weather suitable for drying fish. The northern castle was now recognized by the system. Some of the resources near the territory were also included in the system. On the system's strategic map, there were not many resources marked in Sullen's territory. They were wood, iron, and fish resources. The other resources that were not found were not listed in the system. Currently, the only things that could be traded in the territory were various iron weapons and white sugar. As for wood, Sullen's territory was too far away from Blackstone City. It would be a loss to ship them there. P.S. Rolling on the ground, please recommend me. Chapter 69. In the smithy, a dozen blacksmith apprentices were forging ironware. There were now 2 blacksmiths in the smithy, and they were currently forging a batch of half-body armor. These half-body armor would also be sold as supplies. Other than sugar, these were the most profitable goods in the territory. Robert's caravan had brought 20 half-body armors and 40 battle axes. Similarly, the furs accumulated in the territory were also given to them to be sold. There were also some special furs among these furs, the furs of gnolls. The merchants of this era were definitely filthy. In any case, Sulen couldn't accept the furs of gnolls, but in Robert's opinion, the furs of gnolls were the easiest to get rid of. These furs were very popular in the black market. The height of the gnolls made them easy to make into leather coats, and the fact that they came from a humanoid creature made it even easier to process them. As for the fact that these furs came from a humanoid creature, no one cared at all. If Sulen was a little more greedy, he would have at least 1,000 or 2,000 furs from the gnolls he hunted before. Sulen brought a few barbarian warriors to the iron mine in the northeast of the territory. Yesterday afternoon, Sulen received a message saying that some gnolls had been discovered near the iron mine. There were only 10 barbarian warriors guarding the iron mine, and they couldn't spare any manpower to clear out the gnolls. Although the addition of the bear tribe had doubled the number of barbarian warriors, as the territory developed, there was still a shortage of manpower. The ships flowed down the river. With the ships, it was much more convenient to travel from the territory to the mine. Sullen's territory didn't have many warhorses, so they couldn't form a cavalry. Moreover, the barbarians were all tall and large, and their weapons and equipment were over 200 kilograms. Ordinary warhorses couldn't carry such heavy loads for long-distance raids. The ships flowed down the Whitewater River, and after half an hour, the group of people landed at the dock of the mine. There was already a barbarian warrior waiting at the dock. After a simple rest, Sulen led 10 barbarian warriors to the wilderness northeast of the mine. 2 barbarian warriors cleared the path with their axes, cutting down the dense bushes that obstructed their path. The rest of the barbarian warriors were vigilantly observing their surroundings. The wilderness was lush with vegetation. In many places, the weeds had grown to a height of 2 to 3 meters. It was very suitable for hiding. The barbarian warriors surrounded Sulen in the middle. In such an environment, it was very easy to sneak up on him. The weeds blocked his line of sight. Not far away, he could hear the sounds of some beasts running away in fear. There were many wild beasts in the wilderness, but the number of magical beasts was very small. Most of them had their own territories. In fact, the current territory of the human countries was cleared by the elves in the previous era. It was not until the elves returned to the elven forest that the land was occupied by other races. Later on, under the leadership of the human heroes, the humans defeated the orcs, drove out the giants and other races, and finally occupied the land. The earliest human nobles in this world were all heroes of the ancient times. Of course, they were heroes before they became nobles. Almost all of the pure-blooded ancient nobles in this world were descendants of those ancient human heroes. Of course, since the end of the Second Era, the number of nobles among the humans began to increase. It was also from that time that human kingdoms appeared. After walking for about an hour in the wilderness, their field of vision widened. The soil under their feet also turned into sand. This environment was not suitable for plants to grow. When the plants were not so lush, Sulen suddenly found a valley. Let's go check out that valley. The best place to live in this wilderness was the valley. If the gnolls were really here, it was very likely that they lived in this valley. The group continued to walk toward the valley. After about 10 minutes, Sulen suddenly smelled blood. Blood, it seems that we found the right place. Smelling the blood in the air, Sulen signaled everyone to stop. He told everyone to spread out and guard the entrance of the valley. Sulen planned to catch all of the gnolls in one fell swoop. Seeing that the barbarians had spread out, Sulen gestured for everyone to move forward again. Then everyone moved toward the entrance of the valley. When they got close to the entrance of the valley, Sulen's expression was a little strange. The valley was unexpectedly quiet. A gust of wind blew, but other than the smell of blood, there was no movement inside at all. Sulen frowned and told everyone to stay where they were. Then, he ordered an agile barbarian warrior to carefully approach the entrance of the valley and sneak in. After a while, the barbarian warrior stood at the entrance of the valley and waved at everyone. Sulen then led everyone into the valley. As soon as they entered the valley, the smell of blood was several times stronger. Frowning, Sulen walked in. Soon, he saw a messy scene. This was indeed a gathering place of gnolls. Looking at the scale, there were at least 500 gnolls. However, it was now completely destroyed. In the center of the valley, there were more than a dozen bonfires of various sizes. Beside the bonfires were a large number of gnoll remains. The flesh on the remains had been eaten clean. Even the hard skulls had been smashed and the brains inside had been swallowed. Sulen frowned and looked around. There were at least a few dozen gnoll remains here. There were not many traces of battle in the gathering place. Other than the gnoll remains, there were no other corpses found. Obviously, the difference between the two sides was huge. The gnolls did not even cause any casualties. Of course, it was also possible that the attackers took away the bodies of their companions when they left. However, judging from the traces at the scene, the probability of that was very low. The attackers were very strong. Many parts of the gnoll's bones were crushed. This kind of injury was usually caused by a blunt weapon, most likely a mace. The same was true for the gnoll skulls. The huge force directly crushed the skulls. This kind of strength was not inferior to the barbarian guards at all. The attackers ate the bodies of the gnolls. Although there were many races in the wilderness that had the habit of eating humans, there were not many races that could completely crush the gnolls. For example, swamp giants, frost giants, ogres, and so on. Although they were different races, they had one thing in common: they were not easy to deal with. Swamp giants and frost giants belonged to the giant subspecies. They were powerful creatures from the mythological era before the First Era. They were powerful creatures that were as strong as gods. However, after the mythological era ended, the powerful giants disappeared. Most of the giant subspecies only inherited their thin bloodline. Although they only inherited a thin bloodline, they were still very strong. Group number 877655894, welcome to chat. Also, please recommend me, recommend me, recommend me. Important things need to be said 3 times. P.S. Thank you to Chung E's Ho E for the 100 Chidian coins reward. Thank you to Guyu for the 200 Chidian coins reward. Chapter 70. There were many types of giants, including sea giants, mountain giants, frost giants, swamp giants, cloud giants, and several tens of other types. There was also a huge difference in their strength. However, even the weakest giant would be at least at the level of a knight commander. Most of the giants were at the level of conferred knights. Compared to humans, giants had much stronger physiques. Therefore, even if they were of the same level, humans would not be a match for giants. However, under the same conditions, humans could advance much faster than giants. Their strong bodies gave them great power, but it also limited their development. Frost giants lived in the cold mountains in the north. It was said that there were many frost giant tribes in the polar glaciers. Swamp giants lived in the swamps. Since the endless wasteland was said to be endless, there would naturally be swamps. It was just unknown if they were nearby. In addition to these giant subspecies, the ogres were also a very powerful creature. An adult ogre was 3 meters tall and had a strong body. Its weight could reach 150 kilograms. This creature was very powerful, and its strength was not inferior to the giants. Ogres also lived in tribes. Ogres were also an intelligent race. Although their intelligence was very low, different ogre tribes had their own legacies. They knew how to forge weapons, make armor, and tame wild beasts. They would also capture other intelligent creatures as slaves. An ogre tribe in the wilderness would usually enslave a large number of goblins, kobolds, and gnolls as slaves. They would make them mine ores, forge weapons, and so on. When there was a shortage of food, they would serve as food reserves. Although most ogres had low intelligence, ogre mages would often appear in ogre tribes. Ogre mages were very intelligent. They were usually the rulers of ogre tribes. Moreover, there was a very low chance of two-headed ogres appearing among the ogres. Two-headed ogres were even more powerful. They were even born with the ability to cast spells. Every two-headed ogre that grew up would be a powerful spellcaster. After a detailed search of the valley, Sulen finally found a few clear footprints near the water. The footprints were very large, and they were left by bare feet. The shape of the feet was similar to that of a human's, perhaps 2 or 3 times larger than a human's. In his mind, he could roughly guess what had happened here. One night, a gnoll tribe living there was suddenly attacked by a group of powerful monsters. The gnolls resisted, but their resistance was defeated after a long time. Facing the attack of hundreds of gnolls, the group of attackers had almost no casualties. After defeating these gnolls, the attackers did not leave. Instead, they held a gnoll barbecue party in the valley. They barbecued and ate all the dead and injured gnolls. After killing the gnolls, the attackers did not stay for long. Instead, they escorted a large number of gnoll captives out of the valley. As for where they went, Sulen did not know for the time being. However, such a group of powerful attackers was a great threat to Sulen's territory. This valley was not too far away from Sulen's territory. The straight line distance was at most 50 or 60 kilometers. The distance was too close. Just like the ice Quetzalcoatlus, their range was at most 300 kilometers. The monsters that attacked the Jackalans needed to occupy at least 50 kilometers of land to ensure an adequate supply of food. Judging from the scene, these attackers were carnivores. In other words, once they lived here, Sulen's territory would be the biggest threat, so Sulen had to get rid of this group of attackers. Sulen released all the barbarian warriors to look for clues. These barbarian warriors were very powerful. Even if they encountered the monsters that attacked the Jackalans, they would not be in danger for a while. Even if they were besieged, they would be able to hold on until Sulen arrived. After scattering to look for clues, Sulen sat at the entrance of the valley and waited. Soon, about 10 minutes later, a barbarian warrior found some clues. After all, these attackers left with hundreds of Jackalan captives. With so many people, they must have left a lot of clues. When all the barbarian warriors returned, Sulen followed them to look for clues. The place where the clues were found was not far from the valley. It was located in the south of the valley. When the group arrived, they found many footprints here. The direction of the footprints was south. The group did not delay and followed these footprints to the south. With hundreds of people walking, a new road was created, so Su Len and the others moved very quickly. After walking along this road for about half an hour, Su Len suddenly found a flag. It was made of a pair of stones, about 1 meter tall. There was a wooden pole in the middle with a jackal skeleton on it. On the pile of stones below, there were also some sharp wooden stakes that pierced the skulls of other humanoid creatures. Seeing this symbol, Su Len understood that it was a group of ogres who attacked the group of jackalans. The pile of stones in front of him was a symbol of the barbarians. This meant that this was the territory of the ogres. They were the masters of this territory. If other races entered here, it would be trespassing on their territory. Just like how Su Len would build beacon towers and stone signs at the border of his territory, the barbarians would also leave these in their territory. An ogre tribe. Su Len rubbed his chin. It seemed that he could move his body again. Ogres were not friendly to most races. After all, they liked to eat all kinds of intelligent creatures. In their knowledge, there was no trade at all. If they needed something, they would just take it. In their knowledge, humans who entered their territory were food. Su Len looked at the symbol. The soil was still very new, so it should have been built a long time ago. This ogre tribe should have moved here recently. Perhaps this ogre tribe was defeated by other tribes, or perhaps their original territory could no longer support them. In any case, they were now near Sullen's territory. If one wanted to occupy a piece of land in the wilderness, one could not just leave a mark here. One had to defeat all the surrounding tribes and force them to acknowledge one's existence. If this ogre tribe had come earlier, it was very likely that they would have been part of the allied army last time. The surrounding tribes had been mostly wiped out by Su Len. Other than Su Len, no other tribe was a match for these ogres. Chapter 71. There were many monsters in the wilderness. Even in the southern countries, goblins and kobolds could be found far away from the cities. The reproduction ability of goblins and kobolds was too strong. A pair of goblins could give birth to 12 to 20 goblins in a year. It was the same for kobolds. It would take at least 20 years for a human warrior to grow up and become a qualified warrior. Of course, once the training was complete, a group of elite human soldiers could easily defeat goblins and kobolds that were 10 times their size. Humans had even less of an advantage against the ogres. Ogres ate meat from birth and grew much faster than humans. If it wasn't for the lack of food, the number of ogres would have multiplied by several times. It was also because of the small number of ogres that humans were able to drive them into the wilderness. Su Len went around the flagpole and continued to advance towards the ogre camp. Since the ogres had captured a large number of gnolls as slaves, it meant that they would build a tribe here. After entering the territory controlled by the ogres, Su Len and his party became much more cautious. The ogres were not weak like the goblins, kobolds, or gnolls. A single adult ogre warrior could easily take care of a small group of human soldiers. According to human classification, an ogre was a knight. An adult ogre was more than 3 meters tall, wore armor, and wielded a giant mace. Although the mace looked ugly, it was very powerful. Even a knight's plate armor would be dented by the mace. Getting hit by the mace would be considered a light injury. The ogre warriors were even more powerful, and he didn't know how big the ogre tribe was. The land in the wilderness did not have an owner, but it was not easy to conquer it. Even Calant's city took hundreds of years to expand its territory from a few dozen kilometers to the current northern provinces. Of course, this was because the kingdom of Florence was at its peak at that time, and it could only achieve this with the power of the entire country. It had been over a century since the provinces of the Northlands had expanded outwards. Even so, monster attacks in the northern provinces were several times more than those in the southern provinces. The forests, mountains, lakes, and other monsters in the territory were like weeds. They would appear clean after a few months, but they would appear again. As they continued forward, more and more traces of ogres were discovered. Su Len and the rest slowed down. They could encounter ogres at any time. Soon, Sulen saw two ogres carrying mace and wearing crude armor walking towards them. The two ogres were about 3 meters tall and had yellow skin. They wore tattered fur and heavy armor on their shoulders, chests, and wrists. The armor was probably made by them. Due to their limited technology, they could only make it very thick. There was a foot-long iron spike on the armor. The mace in their hands weighed at least 50 kilograms. The surface of the mace was dark red, and there were even pieces of meat hanging from the spikes. The intelligence of an ogre wasn't high. An adult ogre's intelligence was about the same as a wolf's, but it would be a big mistake to treat them as idiots. These seemingly stupid creatures possessed powerful combat instincts. Even an experienced warrior would have to be extremely careful. Seeing the two ogres approach, Sulen made a hand gesture. The group hid in the bushes at the side. Taking out the spear from his storage space, Sulen slowly adjusted his posture. The other barbarian warriors also lowered their breathing and stared intently at the ogres walking towards them. The two ogres did not notice that there was much around them. They quickly walked to where Sulen and the rest were lying in ambush. Sulen, who had been waiting for a long time, moved and stabbed the spear in his hand. The sharp spear pierced through the back of the ogre's heart. The ugly armor on the ogre's body didn't provide any protection at all. The spear pierced through the gaps in the armor. A one-shot kill. The spear pierced through the heart and came out from the front. The ogre, who was over 100 kilograms, was pierced through like a stick of candied fruit. Large amounts of dark red blood spurted out from the wound. Sulen's spear swept horizontally. The heavy ogre's body was like a giant sandbag as it slammed into the other ogre that was about to charge over with its mace. Bam! The corpse of the ogre sent the other ogre flying. Its large body rolled a few meters on the ground. Before it could react, a giant axe came crashing down on its head. Smelly blood splattered. The ogre's ugly head spun and rolled to Sulen's feet. Stepping on the ogre's head, Sulen shook his spear and shook off the blood on it. After the barbarian warriors dealt with the two ogre corpses, the group continued to explore the depths of the wilderness. Sulen was prepared to find the ogre's camp and destroy it. He did not want to have a ticking time bomb near his territory. If he did not get rid of these ogres, he would not be able to sleep well. After dealing with the ogre corpses, Sulen and the group continued forward. This time, they did not take the path that the ogres had opened. Instead, they took a detour. Not long after they walked, there was movement in front of them again. "It's the gnolls," a barbarian warrior said in a low voice. Pushing aside the weeds, Sulen quickly discovered the group of gnolls. It was a small group of gnolls. There were only a dozen of them. They had tamed 3 aardwolves and a dozen goblins and kobolds as slaves. The group of gnolls seemed to be in a difficult situation. There were no young gnolls in the group. All of them were adults. It was obvious that they had survived a battle. They were probably the ones who had lost. These gnolls were lucky to have escaped. Sulen was not going to be polite with the experience points that were delivered to him. He gestured at the barbarians, and the barbarians quietly crept forward. Charge! The barbarian warrior's figure appeared from the bushes. In an instant, he crossed a dozen meters and swung the giant axe in his hand across the waist of the gnolls. The sharp battle axe cut through the muscles, broke the spine, and split the gnolls in half. The sudden attack of the 10 barbarians did not give the gnolls any chance to fight back. They were killed by the barbarian warrior in a breath's time. The remaining goblins and kobolds were scared out of their wits. They scattered and tried to escape. Whoosh! Hand axes flew out. The goblins and kobolds did not even manage to run a few steps before they were hit in the back or the head by the sharp hand axes. The sharp blade of the axes almost completely sank into their bodies. The battle was over in a breath's time. P.S. Thank you for the 3,500 Chidian coins tip. Thank you for the 1,000 Chidian coins tip. Please recommend me. Please recommend me. Please recommend me. Important things have to be said 3 times. Thank you for all the tips you've given me during this period of time. I'll add more chapters today. Omega. Chapter 72. After finishing the battle and cleaning up the battlefield, the group continued to follow the traces left behind. Sulan didn't encounter any more gnolls for the rest of the journey. After crossing a hill, Sulan finally saw the ogre's camp. I should have bought a telescope. Sulan felt a little helpless as he looked at the ogre camp in the distance. Although this world was generally at the level of the Middle Ages, there would always be new gadgets with the presence of magi. Glass, for example, had been created by magi a long time ago. Its main purpose was to be used as a tool for experiments. Telescopes belonged to this category as well. Normal telescopes cost around 20 kinnar, but if they were enchanted with special magical effects, the price could go up to several thousand kinnar. For example, if they were enchanted with eagle eye or night vision. The ogre camp was built halfway up a mountain. At this moment, large numbers of gnolls, kobolds, and gnolls were building the camp under the whips of the ogres. Towering gnolls at the foot of the mountain were chopping down logs. After some simple repairs, these logs were transported to the camp halfway up the mountain. Thick logs were smashed into the ground one by one, while the gnolls and kobolds cleared the rocks under the whips and piled them up into a stone wall. It was obvious that the ogres wanted to build a fortress here. Plumes of black smoke rose from within the ogre camp. Large furnaces could be seen even from afar, and a few tall ogres were forging weapons. Although the ogre blacksmith's weapons were crudely made, with the ogre's strength, as long as they were sturdy and had enough weight, they would become killing machines in their hands. Sullen's expression was grave. There were at least 100 ogres in this camp. If they were unlucky, there might even be 200 ogres. In addition, there were even more gnolls, and kobolds as slaves. The ogre camp was very powerful. This camp was already more than half completed. With the ogre's speed, this simple fortress would be completed soon. While the ogre fortress looked ugly and the buildings were in a mess, the entire fortress was built from thick logs. At the same time, it was supported by stacked stone walls. There was no need to doubt the fortress's sturdiness. There were many slaves working, and many of them were nailed to death with wooden stakes. None of the slaves dared to slack off. If they were found slacking off, the nearby ogre supervisors would lash out with their leather whips. With the ogre's monstrous strength, even gnolls would be torn apart with a single lash, while goblins and kobolds would be half dead. These slaves who had lost their ability to work would not be abandoned. Instead, they would be killed by the ogres as food. The ogres weren't worried about a lack of manpower. If too many slaves died, they could just go to the wastelands and capture another batch. After all, there were many monsters in the wastelands. An ogre tribe of 100 or 200 people was not considered small. More importantly, such an ogre tribe was likely to have an ogre wizard. It should be known that ogre wizards were not easy to deal with. Unlike many spellcasters who had weak bodies, ogre wizards were completely proficient in both magic and martial arts. They had a tyrannical body while also possessing impressive spellcasting abilities. Although the spells that ogre shamans knew were limited, they could basically cast spells without chanting. They were much stronger than normal human spellcasters. Without special training, it was difficult for human spellcasters to master the technique of instantaneous spellcasting. Ogre shamans liked close combat. Other than being a wizard, they were also warriors who were proficient in close combat. Other than that, ogre shamans were also very intelligent. Normal ogres had an intelligence of around 5, which was even lower than wolves. However, ogre shamans were completely different. Their intelligence was usually above 16. You guys hide here. I'll take a closer look. Sulan looked around and left the barbarian guards here. He was going to take a closer look. Boss, you stay here. We'll go investigate. That's right, boss, let us go. As soon as Sulan finished speaking, the barbarian guards all objected. They were very clear about the power of the ogres. Although they had easily killed 2 ogres before, the ogres were not to be trifled with. "All right, all of you stay here. These ogres are nothing in my eyes," Sulen directly ordered. To be honest, if he went all out, it wasn't impossible for him to win against these ogres. However, this was not a game, and monsters would not run away. If he couldn't clear out these ogres in one go, the wandering ogres would be a greater threat to his territory. After all, he couldn't always patrol his territory. Moreover, his territory was so big that there were bound to be areas that he couldn't take care of. Therefore, the best way was to kill all the ogres in one go. Sulen put away his spear and disappeared into the bushes. Although the ogres looked dumb, they were not slow. Moreover, ogre shamans could use bloodthirsty berserk. This berserk was even scarier than the barbarian berserk. Although the ogres would be weakened for a longer period of time after going berserk, very few people could survive it. With the help of the bushes, Sulen quickly made his way to a spot about 200 meters away from his feet. At this point, it would be difficult for Sulen to get closer. The ogres were not as unprofessional as the gnolls. They had long since cleared away the weeds near the camp. After observing for a while, Zhao Fu's heart sank. The ogre tribe in front of him was a powerful enemy. Apart from the ogre warriors, there were also many ogre warriors. These ogre warriors were much larger than their own kind and used battle axes. Moreover, the battle axes in their hands were larger and heavier than the ones used by the barbarian warriors. Apart from the battle axes, they were also equipped with cast iron armor, throwing spears, and heavy flying axes. According to human standards, these ogre warriors were already at the level of Grand Knights. Most of Sulen's barbarian guards were at this level as well. However, there were only 71 barbarian guards in total, while there were at least 50 ogre warriors here. On the other side of the camp, there were a few large arrow porcupines in a large metal cage. These were one of the few wild beasts that the ogres had tamed. The arrow porcupines were 1.3 meters tall and had thick skin. They had 2 sharp fangs in their mouths and a few sharp spikes on their backs. Once they charged, they were like small bulldozers. Even the heavy cavalry of the human empire would not be willing to clash with them. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.